Welcome, relax, and let me take you on a journey through the memories and mysteries of my ancient kingdom. Let me take you through the secrets of my story, through the wonders and challenges I faced as queen.
Welcome. Relax, close your eyes, and let me take you on a journey through time, to the golden shores of the Nile, where waters flowed peacefully beneath infinite skies and where one of the most extraordinary women in ancient history ruled a kingdom of splendor and mystery. This is the story of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, a figure shrouded in legend, often misunderstood, but always fascinating. When you think of Cleopatra, what comes to mind? Perhaps you imagine a seductress, a woman of supernatural beauty who enchanted powerful men with her charms. But the real Cleopatra was so much more than this. She was a brilliant scholar, an astute political strategist, a charismatic leader who spoke numerous languages and governed one of the richest and most culturally sophisticated kingdoms of the ancient world. She was a woman who defied the conventions of her time, who negotiated with the greatest leaders of Rome, and who fought with every means to preserve the independence of her beloved Egypt. To truly understand who Cleopatra was, we must travel back in time to the ancient city of Alexandria, a metropolis that shone like a jewel on the Mediterranean. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, Alexandria had become the cultural and intellectual heart of the Hellenistic world. Its wide streets were walked by scholars, merchants, artists, and philosophers from every corner of the known world. The Great Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, guided ships into the harbor, while the legendary Library of Alexandria housed the knowledge of humanity. In this extraordinary city, surrounded by luxury and learning, Cleopatra was born in 69 before the Common Era. She was not, as many might think, of Egyptian blood, but descended from the Macedonian Ptolemaic dynasty, founded by Alexander the Great's general, Ptolemy I Soter. For nearly 300 years, the Ptolemies had ruled Egypt, bringing with them Greek culture, but also embracing, at least in part, the ancient pharaonic traditions. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, was a weak and unpopular ruler. His reign was characterized by political instability, debts to Rome, and continuous palace intrigues. However, what Ptolemy lacked in political ability, he compensated for in his love of art and culture. He was a lover of music. So much so that his nickname, Auletes, means flute player. In this environment of decadent luxury and political intrigue, Cleopatra spent her formative years. But let the scene dissolve for a moment. Imagine the warm nights of Alexandria, when the Mediterranean breeze carried the scent of exotic spices and jasmine from the palace gardens. Imagine the marble corridors illuminated by oil lamps, the walls decorated with frescoes depicting scenes from Greek and Egyptian mythology. Imagine the distant sound of waves breaking against the harbor, mixed with the nocturnal songs of birds. In this world of contrasts, where Greek grandeur met ancient Egyptian wisdom, grew a child destined to change the course of history. Cleopatra was not the only child of Ptolemy XII. She had sisters and brothers, and, as was customary in the Ptolemaic dynasty, marriages between brothers and sisters were practiced to keep the royal bloodline pure. This tradition, which may seem strange to us today, was actually common in the royal families of ancient Egypt, both among native pharaohs and among the Greek Ptolemies. But such practice also led to fierce rivalries and deadly plots for the throne. From her earliest age, Cleopatra demonstrated exceptional intelligence. While many princesses of her era were educated primarily in domestic arts and singing, Cleopatra received an education that would have been the envy of any male scholar of her time. Her father, recognizing her talent, provided her with the best tutors available. She studied philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, rhetoric, and medicine. But what truly distinguished her was her talent for languages. According to the Greek historian Plutarch, who wrote about her about a century after her death, Cleopatra could converse in at least 7 or 8 languages. She spoke Greek naturally, the language of the court and the ruling class. But unlike her Ptolemaic ancestors, Cleopatra also learned ancient Egyptian, the language of the people she ruled. This choice was not only pragmatic but deeply symbolic. It showed a respect for Egyptian culture that previous Ptolemaic rulers had often ignored. Cleopatra also spoke Hebrew, Aramaic, Ethiopian, Syrian, Median, Parthian, and possibly Latin, although the latter may have been learned later in her life when she became more involved with Rome. This linguistic ability was not simply an intellectual hobby. It was a powerful political tool. It allowed her to communicate directly with ambassadors and foreign leaders without the need for interpreters, which meant she could negotiate privately and understand nuances that would otherwise have been lost. But languages were only part of her education. Cleopatra attended the Mouseion, the research institution associated with the Great Library of Alexandria. There she studied with some of the greatest thinkers of her time. The library, with its shelves containing hundreds of thousands of papyrus scrolls, was a treasure trove of knowledge. It housed works of philosophy, science, literature, and medicine from all over the known world. Cleopatra devoured this knowledge with passion. She is said to have been particularly interested in chemistry and alchemy, and that she spent hours in a kind of ancient laboratory, experimenting with herbs and cosmetics. She even wrote several treatises on these subjects, although, unfortunately, all her works were lost when the Library of Alexandria was destroyed by fires over the centuries. The famous physician Galen, who lived a few centuries after Cleopatra, studied her writings and was able to recreate some of her recipes, including a special cream that was said to help men regrow their hair. Cleopatra's interest in medicine and natural sciences was not unusual for a ruler of her time, but her dedication was remarkable. She understood that knowledge was power, and that to rule effectively, she needed to understand not only politics and military strategy, but also the well-being of her people. She studied agriculture and irrigation, knowing how vital the management of the Nile's waters was for Egypt. She studied economics and trade, understanding that the wealth of her kingdom depended on trade routes and diplomatic alliances. But Cleopatra was not just an intellectual locked in an ivory tower. She was also deeply aware of the power of image and propaganda. From a young age, she understood that to effectively rule Egypt, she had to present herself not only as a Greek ruler, but as a true Egyptian pharaoh. She identified herself with the goddess Isis, the great mother of Egypt, sister wife of Osiris, and mother of Horus. This association with Isis was not new. Other Ptolemaic queens had done it before, but Cleopatra took this identification to a completely new level. She dressed as a pharaoh in temples, wore the crown with the uraeus, the sacred serpent that symbolized divine royalty. She commissioned statues and reliefs that depicted her in Egyptian style, with traditional clothing and symbols of pharaonic power. This was not mere theatrical fiction. Cleopatra truly believed she was the reincarnation of the goddess, and the Egyptian people, who for centuries had seen the Ptolemies as Greek foreigners, finally began to see in her a true ruler, a worthy heir to the ancient pharaohs. As Cleopatra grew and matured, the world around her became increasingly turbulent. Rome, the growing superpower of the Mediterranean, was extending its influence across the entire known world. Egypt, while still formally independent, was increasingly under Rome's shadow. Cleopatra's father owed enormous sums of money to Roman bankers, and the stability of his kingdom depended on Rome's favor. In 58 before the Common Era, when Cleopatra was about 11 years old, her father was temporarily deposed and exiled. One of his daughters, Berenice IV, seized power with the support of a court faction. But Ptolemy XII did not give up easily. With Rome's help, and particularly that of General Aulus Gabinius, he reconquered the throne in 55 before the Common Era. Berenice was executed, and Ptolemy returned to power. Cleopatra, who had observed all this carefully, learned crucial lessons about the nature of power, that it was fragile, that it depended on alliances, and that sometimes it required ruthlessness. In 52 before the Common Era, when Cleopatra was about 17 years old, her father named her co-regent. It was a rare honor, and it demonstrated how much Ptolemy valued his daughter's intelligence and capabilities. For 2 years, Cleopatra ruled alongside her father, learning the mechanisms of power, meeting ambassadors, making decisions on state matters. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 before the Common Era, he left the throne to Cleopatra, then 18 years old, and to her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, who was only 10 years old. According to Ptolemaic tradition and their father's will, Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII were to marry and rule together as co-regents. But from the beginning, it was clear who the real power was. Cleopatra was older, more experienced, infinitely more intelligent. She dominated council meetings, made decisions without consulting her child brother husband. Her first acts as queen demonstrated her determination and her understanding of the challenges Egypt faced. Egypt at that time was going through economic difficulties. The Nile floods had been irregular, causing bad harvests and famines. Inflation was high, and there was discontent among the people. Cleopatra tried to address these problems by implementing economic reforms, controlling prices, and ensuring more equitable distribution of grain. But economic problems were only part of the challenges she faced. The real threat came from within. Ptolemy XIII, although young, was surrounded by ambitious advisors who wanted to rule through him. These advisors, particularly the eunuch Pothinus and General Achillas, resented Cleopatra's dominance and began plotting against her. They wanted Ptolemy XIII to rule alone, with them pulling the strings behind the scenes. Tensions grew for months. Cleopatra tried to maintain her position, but her brother's advisors were determined. In 48 before the Common Era, about 3 years after ascending to the throne, Cleopatra was driven out of Alexandria. It was a devastating moment. The woman who had prepared her entire life to rule, who had studied languages and sciences and politics, was forced to flee into exile. But Cleopatra was not one to give up easily. She took refuge in Syria, where she began gathering an army. She recruited mercenaries, formed alliances with Bedouin tribes, and prepared for her return to Egypt. Meanwhile, events in Rome were about to change the course of her life. Rome was embroiled in a civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, two of the most powerful generals of the Republic. This civil war would have profound consequences for Egypt and for Cleopatra. After defeating Pompey's forces at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece in 48 before the Common Era, Caesar pursued his rival to Egypt. Pompey, seeking refuge, arrived in Alexandria hoping for the protection of the young King Ptolemy XIII. But Ptolemy's advisors, believing they would gain Caesar's favor, made a grave mistake. They had Pompey assassinated and presented his severed head to Caesar when he arrived in Egypt. Caesar, far from being pleased, was disgusted. Pompey had been his son-in-law and colleague, and although they had become enemies, Caesar had hoped for eventual reconciliation. This vile assassination offended his sense of Roman honor. Caesar settled in the royal palace of Alexandria, declaring that he would arbitrate the dispute between Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII according to the terms of their father's will. Cleopatra, who was camped outside the city with her army, learned of Caesar's arrival. She immediately understood that this was her opportunity. Caesar was the most powerful man in the Roman world, and if she could gain his support, she could reclaim her throne. But there was a problem. Her brother's forces controlled the entrances to the city and the palace. How could she reach Caesar without being captured or killed? This is where one of the most famous stories about Cleopatra comes into play. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra had herself wrapped in a carpet, or perhaps in a canvas sack used to transport goods. A trusted Sicilian named Apollodorus smuggled her into the palace, carrying the carpet as a gift for the Roman general. When the carpet was unrolled before Caesar, Cleopatra emerged. The impact must have been extraordinary. Caesar, a man of 52 years, veteran of countless military campaigns, experienced as diplomat, suddenly found himself face to face with a 21-year-old woman who had the audacity and ingenuity to introduce herself into his presence in such a dramatic fashion. But what won Caesar over was not just the audacity of Cleopatra's entrance. It was the woman herself. Cleopatra was, according to ancient accounts, not a classic beauty. Coins minted with her effigy show her with a prominent nose, a strong chin, and features that today we would call distinctive rather than delicate. But what made her irresistible was not conventional physical beauty. It was her charm, her intelligence, her ability to converse on any topic, the musicality of her voice. Plutarch wrote that conversing with her had an irresistible charm and that her presence, combined with the persuasiveness of her speech, had something stimulating about it. Cleopatra and Caesar spent that night talking. They discussed politics, philosophy, literature. Caesar, who was himself a cultured man and brilliant strategist, must have found in Cleopatra an intellectual equal, something rare in a world where women were rarely taken seriously in affairs of state. But Cleopatra did not rely solely on conversation. She knew what she wanted: the restoration of her throne and the downfall of her brother and his advisors. Caesar, fascinated by the young queen, decided to support her. When Ptolemy XIII and his advisors discovered that Cleopatra was in the palace with Caesar, they were furious. They felt betrayed, and they feared for their power. Tensions quickly exploded into what became known as the Alexandrian War. Ptolemy's advisors mobilized the Egyptian army against Caesar and his relatively few troops. Caesar found himself besieged in the royal palace, with Cleopatra at his side. The conflict was fierce and lasted several months. During the siege, a fire broke out that damaged parts of the city, including, according to some accounts, the Great Library of Alexandria, although the extent of this damage is still debated by historians. Caesar, although outnumbered, was a military commander of genius. He used his troops cunningly, defending key positions and waiting for reinforcements. When support troops finally arrived, Caesar launched a counterattack. In the decisive battle near the Nile Delta, Ptolemy XIII's forces were defeated. The young king, trying to escape, drowned in the Nile when his boat capsized under the weight of his golden armor. With the death of Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra was restored to the throne. But Caesar, following Egyptian tradition, established that she must marry another brother, Ptolemy XIV, who was then only 12 years old. This marriage was purely symbolic. Cleopatra dominated completely, and the young Ptolemy was little more than a decorative figure. Caesar remained in Egypt for several months after the end of the war. He and Cleopatra spent much time together, and their relationship deepened. It is said that they took a cruise along the Nile on a luxurious royal barge, visiting the temples and monuments of ancient Egypt. For Caesar, this journey was probably part tourism and part demonstration of power. For Cleopatra, it was an opportunity to show Caesar the wonders and wealth of her kingdom. In June of 47 before the Common Era, Cleopatra gave birth to a son. She named him Ptolemy XV Caesar, but he was commonly known as Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. Cleopatra claimed that Julius Caesar was the father, and while Caesar never officially acknowledged paternity, he did not deny it either. The birth of Caesarion was politically significant. If he was indeed Caesar's son, he represented a potential heir to both the Egyptian throne and, possibly, to Caesar's power in Rome. Caesar eventually left Egypt to deal with other military matters in the east. His famous phrase, Veni, Vidi, Vici, or I came, I saw, I conquered, was coined after his quick victory over Pharnaces II of Pontus in Asia Minor. But Egypt and Cleopatra remained in his thoughts. In 46 before the Common Era, Cleopatra traveled to Rome with Caesarion and her nominal husband-brother Ptolemy XIV. Her arrival in Rome was sensational. She stayed in one of Caesar's villas across the Tiber River, and her presence in the city caused quite a stir. Some Romans were fascinated by this exotic queen from the storied land of Egypt. Others were scandalized. Rome was officially a republic, and the idea of monarchy was anathema to many Romans. The sight of Caesar openly consorting with a foreign queen, and the rumors that he might be planning to make himself king, aroused suspicion and hostility. Caesar, however, seemed unbothered by the gossip. He commissioned a golden statue of Cleopatra depicted as the goddess Venus, and placed it in the temple of Venus Genetrix, the ancestral goddess of the Julian family. This was an extraordinary honor, and it linked Cleopatra publicly with Caesar and with divine favor. The famous orator Cicero, who met Cleopatra during this period, was not impressed. In a letter to a friend, he wrote simply, "I hate the queen." Despite the controversy, Cleopatra's time in Rome was not wasted. She observed Roman politics closely, met influential senators and generals, and continued to strengthen her relationship with Caesar. But her stay in Rome was cut tragically short. On the Ides of March, the 15th day of March, in 44 before the Common Era, Julius Caesar was assassinated. He was stabbed to death by a group of senators, including his former friend Brutus, in the theater of Pompey. The assassination of Caesar was a catastrophe for Cleopatra. Not only had she lost her lover and political ally, but her position was now extremely precarious. She was a foreign queen in a hostile city, and Caesar's assassins might well have seen her as an enemy. Wisely, she immediately left Rome and returned to Egypt with Caesarion. Shortly after her return, her young brother husband Ptolemy XIV died suddenly. The cause of death was officially recorded as unknown, but many historians suspect that Cleopatra had him poisoned. With Ptolemy XIV out of the way, Cleopatra made her young son Caesarion her co-ruler, styling him as Ptolemy XV Caesar. For the next few years, Cleopatra focused on ruling Egypt. The country was still struggling with economic problems, but Cleopatra worked diligently to improve conditions. She implemented policies to stabilize grain prices, invested in irrigation projects to make agriculture more reliable, and fostered trade relationships that brought wealth into Egypt. She also continued her patronage of arts and sciences, maintaining Alexandria's status as a center of learning. But Egypt could not remain isolated from the tumultuous events in Rome. After Caesar's assassination, Rome descended into another period of civil war. Two main factions emerged. The assassins, led by Brutus and Cassius, and Caesar's supporters, led by Mark Antony. Octavian, who was Caesar's great-nephew and adopted heir, and Lepidus. These three men formed what is known as the Second Triumvirate, a formal political alliance to share power and avenge Caesar's murder. In 42 before the Common Era, the forces of the Second Triumvirate defeated Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in Greece. After this victory, the triumvirs divided the Roman world among themselves. Octavian took control of the western provinces. Lepidus took Africa, and Mark Antony was given the wealthy eastern provinces, including oversight of client kingdoms like Egypt. Mark Antony was in many ways the opposite of Julius Caesar. Where Caesar was calculating and disciplined, Antony was passionate and impulsive. Where Caesar was politically astute, Antony was more straightforward and less subtle. But Antony was also a capable military commander, charismatic and popular with his soldiers. He established his base in the east and began the task of organizing the eastern provinces and raising money for future military campaigns. In 41 before the Common Era, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, which is now part of modern Turkey. Officially, the purpose of the meeting was to answer charges that Egypt had aided the assassins of Caesar during the recent civil war. But Antony also needed Egypt's wealth to fund his planned military campaign against the Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival in the east. Cleopatra, Understanding the importance of this meeting, prepared carefully. She was no longer the young woman of 21 who had been smuggled into Caesar's presence in a carpet. She was now a mature ruler of 28, experienced in statecraft, diplomacy, and the uses of power and spectacle. If Antony wanted to see a queen, she would show him a queen beyond his wildest imaginings. Cleopatra's arrival at Tarsus became the stuff of legend. She sailed up the Cydnus River on a magnificent barge with gilded stern and purple sails. The oars were made of silver, and they beat the water in time to the music of flutes, pipes, and lyres. Cleopatra herself reclined under a canopy of gold cloth, dressed as the goddess Venus, the Roman equivalent of the Greek Aphrodite. Beautiful boys dressed as cupids stood on either side, fanning her with peacock feathers. Her most beautiful servants, dressed as sea nymphs and graces, steered the boat and worked the rigging. As the barge approached the city, perfumed smoke from burning incense wafted across the water. The people of Tarsus lined the riverbanks to watch this extraordinary sight. Many even left the marketplace where Antony was seated on his tribunal, waiting for the queen. The message was clear. Cleopatra was not some petty client ruler coming to bow before Roman authority. She was a queen, a goddess incarnate, and she would meet Antony on her own terms. Antony, intrigued and somewhat bemused by this spectacular display, sent messengers inviting Cleopatra to dine with him. She politely declined and instead invited him to dine with her aboard her barge. Antony accepted. The dinner that followed was reportedly magnificent, with lavish food, exquisite entertainment, and brilliant conversation. Cleopatra employed all her considerable charms, her intelligence, her wit, her knowledge of languages and culture, her ability to make whomever she spoke with feel like the most important person in the world. Over the following days, Antony and Cleopatra spent more time together. They feasted, they talked, they debated. Like Caesar before him, Antony found himself captivated by Cleopatra. But their attraction was different from what she had shared with Caesar. Caesar had been older, more paternal, appreciative of Cleopatra's mind. Antony was closer to her age and temperament. Their relationship was more passionate, more visceral, perhaps more equal. By the end of their meeting in Tarsus, Antony had agreed to support Cleopatra's rule in Egypt, and even to execute her rebellious sister Arsinoe, who had been living in exile and plotting against her. In return, Cleopatra agreed to provide financial support for Antony's military campaigns. But beyond these political arrangements, something more personal had developed. Antony followed Cleopatra back to Alexandria, where he would spend the winter. In Alexandria, Antony seemed to abandon all pretense of Roman dignity. He dressed in Greek fashion, attended symposiums and philosophical discussions, and indulged in the luxurious lifestyle that Alexandria offered. He and Cleopatra formed an exclusive club they called the Society of Inimitable Livers, dedicated to pleasure and excess. They would disguise themselves and wander the streets of Alexandria at night, playing pranks on the citizens. It was behavior scandalous by Roman standards, but Antony seemed not to care. However, political realities could not be ignored forever. In 40 before the Common Era, Antony received news that his wife Fulvia and his brother had raised a rebellion against Octavian in Italy. The rebellion failed, and Antony was forced to return to Rome to deal with the political fallout. Fulvia died shortly after, and to cement the peace with Octavian, Antony married Octavian's sister Octavia in autumn of 40 before the Common Era. For Cleopatra, this must have been a difficult period. Antony had left her, and worse, he had married a Roman woman from one of the most prestigious families. But Cleopatra was pragmatic. She focused on ruling Egypt and raising her children. Before Antony left Alexandria, Cleopatra had become pregnant, and in 40 before the Common Era she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. She named them Alexander Helios, meaning sun, and Cleopatra Selene, meaning moon. Antony remained in the Roman West for 3 years, attempting to fulfill his obligations to Octavian and maintain the peace of the triumvirate. He lived with Octavia, and they had children together. But the alliance between Antony and Octavian was always fragile, based on political necessity rather than genuine friendship or trust. The two men had very different temperaments and ambitions, and it was probably inevitable that they would eventually clash. In 37 before the Common Era, Antony decided to resume his relationship with Cleopatra. He summoned her to meet him in Antioch, a major city in Syria. There, they formalized their alliance, both political and personal. Although there is no clear evidence of a formal marriage ceremony recognized by either Egyptian or Roman law, from this point on, Antony and Cleopatra behaved as husband and wife. Antony acknowledged the twins as his children and gave them royal titles. But the reunion in Antioch was not just about romance. It was about politics and power. Antony needed Egypt's wealth to fund his planned invasion of Parthia, the great empire to the east that had humiliated Rome in previous conflicts. In return for Egypt's financial support, Antony granted Cleopatra control over significant territories. He gave her parts of Phoenicia, Coele Syria, Cyprus, and portions of Cilicia, as well as the valuable balsam groves of Jericho. These territories had once been part of the Ptolemaic Empire, but had been lost over the years. Antony was essentially restoring to Cleopatra much of the empire her ancestors had ruled. This arrangement made strategic sense for Antony. A strong, wealthy Egypt under a loyal ally could provide the resources he needed for his eastern campaigns. But in Rome, these territorial gifts caused outrage. Octavian and his supporters portrayed Antony as a man besotted by an Eastern queen, giving away Roman territories to satisfy his foreign mistress. The propaganda painted Cleopatra as a scheming seductress who had ensnared Antony just as she had ensnared Caesar, corrupting him and turning him against Rome's interests. In 36 before the Common Era, Antony launched his long-planned invasion of Parthia. It was a disaster. The campaign was poorly planned and executed, and Antony's forces suffered terrible losses. He was forced to retreat in disgrace, having achieved nothing, and having lost perhaps a quarter of his army. This failure damaged Antony's reputation and gave more ammunition to his enemies in Rome. Despite this setback, Antony remained in the east and continued his relationship with Cleopatra. In 36 before the Common Era, Cleopatra gave birth to another son by Antony, whom they named Ptolemy Philadelphus. Antony's family with Cleopatra was growing, while his Roman wife Octavia remained in Rome, a symbol of the widening gap between Antony and Octavian. In 34 before the Common Era, Antony had more military success. He conquered Armenia, capturing its king and bringing him back to Alexandria as a prisoner. But instead of celebrating this victory with a traditional Roman triumph in Rome, Antony staged a triumph in Alexandria. This was a profound break with Roman tradition. A Roman triumph was a sacred ceremony that could only be held in Rome, and by staging one in Alexandria, Antony was suggesting that Alexandria, not Rome, was the true center of power. But Antony went even further. After the triumph, he held a ceremony known as the Donations of Alexandria. Seated on golden thrones, Antony and Cleopatra appeared before a huge crowd in Alexandria's gymnasium. Cleopatra was dressed as the goddess Isis, and Antony declared her Queen of Kings. Her son Caesarion was proclaimed King of Kings and legitimate heir of Julius Caesar, a direct challenge to Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son and legal heir. Antony then distributed territories among Cleopatra's children. Alexander Helios was named king of Armenia, Media, and Parthia, territories that Rome did not fully control, but which Antony presumably intended to conquer. Cleopatra Selene was given Cyrenaica and Libya. The young Ptolemy Philadelphus received Phoenicia, Syria, and Cilicia. These declarations were largely symbolic, grand gestures rather than actual transfers of power, but they had enormous political implications. In Rome, Octavian used the Donations of Alexandria as proof that Antony had been corrupted by Cleopatra and had abandoned Roman values. Octavian portrayed Antony not as a Roman general, but as the consort of a foreign queen, as someone who had chosen Egypt over Rome. This propaganda was effective. Many Romans began to see Antony not as a rival Roman leader, but as a traitor who had fallen under the spell of an Eastern seductress. Relations between Octavian and Antony deteriorated rapidly. Antony formally divorced Octavia, Octavian's sister, which was seen as an unforgivable insult. In response, Octavian seized Antony's will, which had been deposited with the Vestal virgins in Rome, and read it publicly to the Senate. The will supposedly contained provisions that shocked Romans. Antony wished to be buried in Alexandria with Cleopatra, and he recognized Caesarion as Julius Caesar's true heir. Whether this will was genuine or a forgery created by Octavian is still debated by historians. In 32 before the Common Era, the Roman Senate, under Octavian's influence, stripped Antony of his powers and declared war. Cleverly, Octavian did not declare war on Antony directly, which would have been seen as another Roman civil war. Instead, he declared war on Cleopatra, portraying the conflict as Rome defending itself against a foreign threat. This framing allowed Octavian to rally Roman patriotism and cast himself as the defender of Roman traditions against Eastern decadence. Antony and Cleopatra prepared for war. They assembled a large fleet and army, drawing on the resources of Egypt and the Eastern territories. The decisive confrontation came in 31 before the Common Era at Actium, a promontory on the western coast of Greece. The Battle of Actium would determine the fate of the Mediterranean world. The battle itself is somewhat mysterious, as ancient accounts differ in their details. What seems clear is that Octavian's fleet, commanded by his general Agrippa, engaged Antony and Cleopatra's fleet in a naval battle. At a crucial moment, Cleopatra's squadron of 60 ships suddenly broke through the battle lines and sailed away. Antony, seeing Cleopatra's departure, abandoned the battle and followed her with his own ship, leaving his fleet and army behind. Why did Cleopatra withdraw? Some ancient sources claim she fled in cowardice or panic, but this explanation seems inconsistent with everything we know about Cleopatra's character. A more likely explanation is that it was a planned strategic retreat. Perhaps Cleopatra and Antony realized the battle was not going in their favor and decided to preserve their ships and return to Egypt to regroup. Or perhaps there was a breakdown in communication, and Cleopatra's departure was misunderstood by Antony. Whatever the reason, the result was catastrophic. With Antony gone, his remaining fleet and army lost heart. Many of his ships surrendered, and his land forces soon after swore allegiance to Octavian. The Battle of Actium was a decisive victory for Octavian. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, but they knew their position was hopeless. Octavian controlled the Roman world, and he would soon come to Egypt to finish what had been started at Actium. The winter of 31 to 30 before the Common Era must have been a dark time for Cleopatra and Antony. They were in Alexandria, surrounded by the luxury and monuments of Egyptian civilization. But they knew that their world was ending. They founded a new club, replacing their old society of inimitable livers. This one they called the Society of the Partners in Death, a grim acknowledgement of their fate. Cleopatra seems to have spent this time preparing for the end. Ancient sources claim that she conducted experiments on condemned prisoners, testing various poisons and methods of suicide to find one that would be quick and painless. She also secured her treasure in a mausoleum she had built near the Temple of Isis. This mausoleum would play a crucial role in the final act of her drama. In the summer of 30 before the Common Era, Octavian's army arrived in Egypt. Antony, showing flashes of his old military skill, managed a few initial successes, but his forces were heavily outnumbered, and his men's morale was broken. On August the 1st, 30 before the Common Era, when Octavian prepared his final assault, Antony's fleet and cavalry defected to the enemy without a fight. The infantry was quickly defeated. With all lost, Cleopatra retreated to her mausoleum with two of her most trusted handmaidens, Iris and Charmion. She sent a message to Antony claiming that she had killed herself. The reason for this false message is unclear. Perhaps she hoped it would prompt Antony to surrender to Octavian, who might treat him more leniently if Cleopatra were already dead. Or perhaps it was a tragic miscalculation. Antony, upon receiving the news that Cleopatra was dead, decided to follow her into death. He asked his servant Eros to kill him, but Eros instead killed himself. Antony then fell on his own sword. But the wound was not immediately fatal. As he lay dying, another message arrived. Cleopatra was actually still alive and in her mausoleum. Antony begged to be taken to her. Cleopatra, for security reasons, had sealed herself inside the mausoleum and would not open the doors. Antony was hoisted through a window into the upper story of the building, where Cleopatra and her handmaidens pulled him up. He died in Cleopatra's arms on August the 10th, 30 before the Common Era. Ancient sources describe this scene as heartbreaking. Cleopatra supposedly covered herself with Antony's blood, beat her breast, and called him her lord, her emperor, her husband. But even in her grief, Cleopatra's political instincts remained sharp. She knew that Octavian would soon come for her, and she needed to consider her options. Octavian, for his part, wanted to capture Cleopatra alive. He had already planned a triumph in Rome, and parading the defeated Queen of Egypt through the streets would be the ultimate symbol of his victory. He sent one of his officers, Cornelius Gallus, to negotiate with Cleopatra and prevent her from destroying herself or her treasure. When Octavian's men entered the mausoleum, they found Cleopatra alive, but in a state of disarray. She had reportedly been starving herself and was weak and unwell. Octavian placed her under guard, nominally for her own protection, but actually to prevent her from committing suicide. He visited her himself, assuring her that she would be treated well. But Cleopatra, who had dealt with Roman leaders all her life, was not fooled. She knew what awaited her in Rome: humiliation, a march through the streets in chains, and then probably execution or lifelong imprisonment. The exact circumstances of Cleopatra's death remain one of history's enduring mysteries. On August the 12th, 30 before the Common Era, just 2 days after Antony's death, Cleopatra died. She was 39 years old. According to the most famous version of the story, popularized by ancient writers and immortalized by Shakespeare, Cleopatra committed suicide by allowing a venomous snake, an asp or Egyptian cobra, to bite her. The snake was supposedly smuggled into her chamber hidden in a basket of figs. This story has powerful symbolic resonance. The asp or cobra was the symbol of the uraeus, the sacred serpent worn on the pharaoh's crown, and was associated with the goddess Isis. Death by snakebite would be a fitting end for a woman who presented herself as the incarnation of Isis and the last true pharaoh of Egypt. However, many modern historians doubt this account for practical reasons. For one thing, Egyptian cobras are large snakes, typically 5 feet or more in length, making them difficult to hide in a basket of figs. Moreover, cobra venom does not always kill, and when it does, death is often slow and painful, taking hours or even days. It seems unlikely that Cleopatra would have trusted her death to such an uncertain method. According to ancient writers like Plutarch, only 2 small marks were found on Cleopatra's arm, which could have been snake bites, but could also have been caused by something else, like a poisoned pin or needle. Some historians suggest that Cleopatra actually used poison rather than a snake. German historian Christoph Schaefer has proposed that she died from drinking a mixture of hemlock, wolfsbane, and opium, which would produce a relatively quick and painless death. This method would also explain how both of Cleopatra's handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, died at the same time. Ancient sources report that when Octavian's guards broke into the chamber, they found Cleopatra lying dead on a golden couch, dressed in her royal regalia. Iris lay dead at her feet, and Charmian, barely alive, was adjusting Cleopatra's crown before she too collapsed and died. There is even a more sinister theory, that Cleopatra did not commit suicide at all, but was murdered on Octavian's orders. Octavian certainly had a motive. While he wanted to parade Cleopatra in his triumph, he also knew that a living Cleopatra, with her charisma and intelligence, could still be a threat. Her son, Caesarion, was also a problem. As the supposed son of Julius Caesar, Caesarion had a potential claim to Caesar's legacy that rivaled Octavian's own. With Cleopatra alive, she could rally support for her son. Indeed, shortly after Cleopatra's death, Octavian ordered the execution of Caesarion. The 17-year-old boy was hunted down and killed, eliminating any challenge to Octavian's position as Caesar's sole heir. Octavian supposedly justified this murder with a callous quip that there could not be two Caesars, two sons. Cleopatra's other children by Antony, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus were spared. They were taken to Rome and raised by Octavian's wife Livia and by Antony's former wife Octavia. Cleopatra Selene was eventually married to Juba II, the scholarly king of Mauritania, and lived a long and apparently happy life. The fate of her twin brother Alexander Helios and younger brother Ptolemy Philadelphus is unknown. They disappear from the historical record and likely died young. Whatever the exact cause of Cleopatra's death, the result was the same. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, came to an end. Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire, and Octavian took personal control of the country, recognizing its importance as the breadbasket of the Mediterranean and its immense wealth. In 27 before the Common Era, Octavian was granted the title Augustus by the Roman Senate, and he became, in effect, the first Roman emperor. The Republic was over, replaced by the Empire, and the transformation was completed with the annexation of Egypt. Octavian, now Augustus, had Cleopatra buried with Antony according to her wishes, though the location of their tomb has never been discovered. He then returned to Rome for his triumph. On August the 13th, 29 before the Common Era, Augustus celebrated 3 successive triumphs for his victories in Illyricum, at the Battle of Actium, and in Egypt. Although Cleopatra herself could not be paraded through the streets, Augustus had an effigy or statue made of her with a snake attached to it, which was displayed in the procession. This image, more than any other, defined how Romans would remember Cleopatra, as an exotic Eastern queen who died by snakebite, defeated by Roman virtue and power. But was this the real Cleopatra? The woman who emerges from careful historical study is far more complex than the figure of legend. Yes, she used her personal relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony to political advantage, but this was not mere seduction. These were genuine partnerships based on mutual interest and, at least with Antony, possibly genuine affection. Cleopatra needed Rome's military might to secure her throne and Egypt's independence. Caesar and Antony needed Egypt's wealth to fund their political and military ambitions. These were strategic alliances made between powerful leaders, not the story of a woman using her feminine wiles to ensnare helpless men. Moreover, the portrayal of Cleopatra as primarily a seductress does a profound disservice to her real achievements and abilities. Cleopatra was one of the best educated people of her time, male or female. Her linguistic skills were extraordinary. Her knowledge of science and medicine was genuine. Her understanding of economics and statecraft was sophisticated. She ruled Egypt for over 20 years, maintaining its prosperity and independence during one of the most turbulent periods in ancient history. Cleopatra was also a cultural patron and builder. she maintained Alexandria's status as the intellectual center of the Mediterranean world. She built temples, including a magnificent temple at Dendera dedicated to Hathor, where she is depicted in traditional pharaonic style alongside her son Caesarion. She promoted Egyptian culture and religion, presenting herself as the earthly embodiment of the goddess Isis. This identification with Isis was not just political theater. It reflected a genuine religious belief and helped her connect with her Egyptian subjects in a way that previous Ptolemaic rulers had not. It is also worth noting that the most detailed ancient sources we have about Cleopatra were written by her enemies or by historians working under emperors descended from Augustus. Roman writers had every reason to portray Cleopatra negatively. She had challenged Roman power. She had been the consort of two of Rome's greatest leaders, and she represented the exotic and dangerous East that Romans both envied and feared. The Cleopatra of Roman propaganda was a convenient villain. Beautiful, seductive, foreign, and ultimately defeated by virtuous Romans. The real Cleopatra was a woman who played the hand she was dealt as well as anyone could have. Born into a declining dynasty, ruling a kingdom caught between its glorious past and an uncertain future, she used every tool at her disposal: her intelligence, her education, her diplomatic skills, her personal charm, and yes, her relationships with powerful men. She fought to preserve Egypt's independence and her dynasty's rule for over 20 years against overwhelming odds. In the end, she lost, but it was a close thing. If circumstances had been slightly different, if Antony had won at Actium, history might remember Cleopatra as one of the great triumphant rulers, rather than a tragic figure. The story of Cleopatra does not end entirely with her death. Her legend grew over the centuries, taking on new forms in different cultures and different eras. In the Middle Ages, she was sometimes portrayed as a tragic romantic heroine. In the Renaissance, she became a symbol of exotic beauty and passion. Shakespeare's play, Antony and Cleopatra, written in 1607, cemented many of the images we have of her today. The magnificent barge on the Cydnus, the asp death, the grand passion with Antony. In the modern era, Cleopatra has been the subject of countless books, plays, and films. The 1963 film Cleopatra, starring Elizabeth Taylor, was one of the most expensive and elaborate films ever made at that time. It portrayed Cleopatra as a glamorous and powerful figure, but still focused primarily on her relationships with Caesar and Antony. More recent scholarship has tried to recover the historical Cleopatra, to see past the layers of legend and propaganda, and understand the real woman and the real ruler. One of the most fascinating aspects of Cleopatra's story that has come to light in recent years involves the physical remnants of her world. For centuries, the locations associated with Cleopatra, including her palace in Alexandria and her tomb, were lost to history. Alexandria, one of the great cities of the ancient world, suffered through earthquakes, tsunamis, war, and the slow decay of time. Much of the ancient city, including the royal quarter where Cleopatra lived, sank beneath the Mediterranean Sea. In the 1990s, a French archaeologist named Frank Godiot began underwater archaeological excavations in Alexandria's harbor. Using ancient descriptions by writers like Strabo, who visited Alexandria in the 1st century before the Common Era, Godiot and his team searched for the royal quarter of the Ptolemies. What they found was extraordinary. Beneath the waters of Alexandria's eastern harbor, they discovered the remains of the ancient royal quarter, including what is believed to be Cleopatra's palace. The palace was located on a small island called Antirrhodos, which Strabo had described in his writings. According to ancient sources, the name Antirrhodos, meaning counter Rhodes, was chosen because the island rivaled the famous island of Rhodes in beauty. On Antirrhodos, Godio's team found a relatively modest palace, about 90 meters by 30 meters, with marble floors. They also discovered massive columns of red Egyptian granite, each about 7 meters tall and 1 meter in diameter, which likely formed a ceremonial gateway to the island. The site yielded numerous other treasures. Godio's team found sphinxes, statues that may represent members of the Ptolemaic dynasty, including one that is believed to depict Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII. They found a colossal stone head thought to be of Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar. They discovered a small temple dedicated to Isis, the goddess with whom Cleopatra identified herself. At the entrance to this temple, a granite statue of an Egyptian priest still stands, untouched for over 2,000 years. These underwater ruins provide a tangible connection to Cleopatra's world. The palace where she lived, the columns she walked past, the temples where she worshipped as both queen and goddess. All of these can now be explored by divers and studied by archaeologists. The ruins were so well preserved because they sank relatively quickly, probably due to earthquakes and tsunamis in the 4th century of the Common Era, and were buried under sand and sediment that protected them from further decay. The discovery of Cleopatra's palace has helped archaeologists and historians better understand the layout and grandeur of ancient Alexandria. The palace, while not enormous by modern standards, was elegantly appointed and strategically located with views of the harbor and easy access to the city. Near the palace, Godio's team also found the remains of a 30-meter-long Roman ship that sank in the harbor, perhaps during the naval conflicts of Cleopatra's era. They found coins, pottery, glass vessels, and jewelry that give us glimpses into the daily life of the royal court. Interestingly, the excavations have also revealed how thoroughly Egyptian the Ptolemaic royal quarter was, despite the Greek origins of the dynasty. The presence of the Isis temple, the Egyptian-style statues, and the pharaonic iconography all demonstrate that Cleopatra and her ancestors, while Greek by blood, had deeply embraced Egyptian culture and religion. This was not just political posturing, but a genuine cultural synthesis that makes the Ptolemaic period one of the most fascinating in Egyptian history. The search for Cleopatra's tomb, however, continues. According to ancient sources, Octavian allowed Cleopatra to be buried with Antony, as she had wished. But the location of this tomb is unknown. Some archaeologists believe it may have been in the royal quarter and is now underwater. Others think it may be at a site called Taposiris Magna, a temple complex west of Alexandria, where archaeologists have been conducting excavations for years. Still, others believe the tomb may have been in the palace complex or in a separate mausoleum that has since been destroyed or is buried beneath modern Alexandria. Finding Cleopatra's tomb would be one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time. It would potentially contain artifacts, inscriptions, and perhaps even the mummies of Cleopatra and Antony themselves. But even if the tomb is never found, The underwater palace and the other archaeological remains give us valuable insights into Cleopatra's world. What can we conclude about Cleopatra after this long journey through her life and legend? She was, without question, one of the most remarkable people of the ancient world. She was highly educated, politically astute, culturally sophisticated, and determined. She ruled Egypt during one of the most challenging periods in its history, maintaining its independence and prosperity for over 2 decades, while surrounded by the growing power of Rome. Cleopatra was also a woman operating in a man's world. The ancient Mediterranean was overwhelmingly patriarchal. Women of the ruling class had some power and influence, but they were expected to exercise it through their husbands, fathers, or sons. Cleopatra broke this mold. She ruled in her own right, and while she did form alliances with Caesar and Antony, she was always the senior partner in these relationships when it came to Egypt. She made the decisions, she controlled the resources, she set the terms. It is tragic that Cleopatra's intellectual achievements and political skills have been overshadowed by her romantic relationships and by her portrayal as a seductress. This says more about the biases of ancient Roman writers and later historians than it does about Cleopatra herself. A male ruler who formed strategic alliances and used charm and diplomacy would be praised for his political acumen. Cleopatra did the same things, but has often been dismissed as a woman who used sexual wiles to manipulate men. Modern scholarship is working to correct this imbalance and to give Cleopatra her due. She was a polyglot scholar who could discourse with ambassadors in their own languages. She was a patron of learning who supported the Library of Alexandria and conducted her own research into medicine and chemistry. She was an economic manager who understood the importance of agriculture, trade, and currency control. She was a religious leader who skillfully used the association with Isis to connect with her Egyptian subjects. She was a military strategist who raised armies and commanded navies. And yes, she was also a woman who had romantic relationships and children, because she was a complete human being with a full and complex life. Cleopatra's story is ultimately a tragedy, but it is a tragedy on an epic scale. She reached the heights of power and came close to achieving her goals, securing Egypt's independence, restoring the glory of the Ptolemaic Empire, and ensuring a throne for her children. But she was playing a game where the odds were stacked against her. Rome was simply too powerful, and the forces of history were moving toward imperial consolidation under a single strong ruler. Cleopatra and Antony represented an alternative vision, a partnership between East and West, a marriage of Egyptian wealth and tradition with Roman military might, a diverse and multicultural empire rather than a uniform Roman one. But that vision failed. Octavian, later Augustus, proved to be a more effective politician and propagandist than Antony, and his forces were better organized and led. After Cleopatra's death, the Mediterranean world would be unified under Roman rule for centuries. The age of independent Hellenistic kingdoms was over, and the age of the Roman Empire had begun. Egypt would not be ruled by Egyptians or by a Macedonian dynasty again until the modern era. Yet Cleopatra's legacy endures. She has become a symbol that different cultures and different eras have interpreted in their own ways. She is a symbol of female power and agency, a woman who refused to be sidelined or controlled. She is a symbol of resistance to imperialism, a leader who fought to preserve her nation's independence. She is a symbol of cultural fusion, someone who bridged Egyptian and Greek and even Roman cultures. She is a symbol of romance and tragedy, a woman whose great love story ended in death. The real Cleopatra was all of these things and more. She was intelligent, ambitious, ruthless when necessary, charming, educated, strategic, and determined. She loved her children and worked to secure their futures. She believed in the divine right of her dynasty to rule Egypt and in her own incarnation as the goddess Isis. She enjoyed luxury, but also valued learning. She made mistakes, but she also achieved remarkable successes. She was, in short, a complete human being, not just a legend or a symbol. As we reach the end of this journey through Cleopatra's life, it is worth taking a moment to imagine her world one last time. Imagine the city of Alexandria in its glory, with its lighthouse guiding ships from across the Mediterranean, its library filled with the wisdom of the ages, its streets bustling with people speaking a dozen different languages. Imagine the palace on the island of Antiochotos, with its marble floors and granite columns, looking out over the harbor. Imagine Cleopatra herself, dressed in the regalia of a pharaoh, crowned with the uraeus, the sacred serpent, receiving ambassadors and making decisions that affected millions of lives. Imagine her studying late into the night by lamplight, reading scrolls from the library, conducting experiments in her laboratory, writing treatises on medicine and cosmetics. Imagine her speaking in fluent Egyptian to her subjects, in Greek to her courtiers, in Latin to Roman visitors, in Hebrew to Jewish merchants, in Aramaic to Syrian traders. Imagine her as a mother, playing with her children, teaching them languages and history, preparing them for the roles they might one day play. Imagine her at the height of her power, sailing up the Cydnus River to meet Mark Antony, confident in her ability to charm and negotiate and achieve her goals. Imagine her in the dark days after Actium, barricaded in her mausoleum with her 2 faithful handmaidens, knowing that the end was near but determined to die on her own terms, as a queen and a goddess, not as a prisoner dragged through the streets of Rome. The story of Cleopatra reminds us that history is made by individuals, by people who make choices in difficult circumstances. Cleopatra faced challenges that would have overwhelmed most people, but she met them with intelligence, courage, and determination. She did not succeed in all her goals, but she tried her best with the resources she had. That is all any of us can do, and in that sense, Cleopatra's story is not just ancient history, but a timeless story of human ambition, struggle, and resilience. As the waters of the Mediterranean lap against the underwater ruins of her palace, as divers explore the corridors where she once walked, as scholars continue to debate the details of her life and death, Cleopatra remains one of history's most fascinating figures. She lived over 2,000 years ago, but she still has the power to capture our imagination, to make us wonder, to inspire us to learn more about the ancient world and about the remarkable people who shaped it. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the life of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt. If you enjoyed this exploration of ancient history, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more journeys through time to take together. Until next time, sleep well, dream of ancient wonders, and remember that behind every legend is a real person whose life was as complex and fascinating as our own.